Maybe it's the time I grew up in. I was 10 years old when Canada had its 100th birthday. I can't describe for you the enthusiasm at that time, the optimism, the sense of, as one of our first prime ministers said, the 20th century belongs to Canada. Just a few years before that, we'd gotten our flag. I was just a little kid, but I remember it so well. So I've always, maybe not worn my heart on my sleeve, but I certainly wore the maple leaf. That patriotism and optimism has had its share of ups and downs over the years. Like anyone my age who's Canadian, one of the defining times was the first Canada-Russia hockey series. We were so confident, so proud of our team, playing the Russians. We couldn't wait to show how we would dominate them and show them how we played Canada's national sport. But that pride, optimism, and cockiness took a big hit when we got creamed in the first game 7-3. We came back and barely won the second game, but it was tough. And then there was a tie with the third game, and then 2 Russian victories back to back. With the Russians having 3 wins and us only 1, we were way behind. We had to win all 3 of the next games. They only had to win 1. Ask any sports statistician what the odds are of winning in that position in the playoffs. Here's a hint. It's nearly impossible. As best I know, the only team to have come back from a 3-1 deficit and won the Stanley Cup was the 1942 Maple Leafs. One time. But Team Canada, now the underdog, came back. We won the next 3 games, and with 34 seconds left on the clock, in a game in Moscow, Canada's Paul Henderson scored the goal that rocked the world, breaking a 5-5 tie, and Canada won the series. Canada came back. That series was particularly important to me. Why? Because I never gave up on Team Canada. In fact, to shut up an English teacher who was dissing the team at the time, I stood up in class and bet him $1 that we'd win. Everybody in the class thought I was nuts. They'd all given up after we got slaughtered in the first game. Collecting that $1 was the sweetest win of any bet I've ever collected on, in front of the whole class. Over the decades, we've seen challenges, and Canada has somehow survived them. But today, I wonder. It's not hockey, and it's certainly not a game. The stakes are much, much higher. So I ask myself, do I still bet on Canada? As we face the 21st century, our country faces the greatest challenges of our existence. Despite all the advantages we have in terms of education, quality of life, and amazing resources, we have big threats as well. Our productivity is declining. Our natural resource-based economy is out of step with the digital economy of today. Our manufacturing industries are disappearing, and we face an existential threat where it appears that our neighbor to the south, supposedly our greatest ally, the U.S., may be poised to devastate our economy, perhaps to get us to become their 51st state or maybe just another colony or territory. So my question is this: can Canada get its mojo back? Can we come back and surprise the world with our strength, our grit, and our ability? And that's why I started this series, to talk to great Canadians and find out what they think about where we are and what we should do. And no better place to start than with Jim Balsillie. You might know him as one of the founders of Research in Motion, or BlackBerry as it's now called, the company that invented the smartphone. When I met him, it was in his role as the chair of the Digital Governance Council, a group he founded to increase Canada's stature and competitiveness in the new digital economy. Welcome, Jim.
A pleasure to be with you, my friend.
What have you been up to recently?
Well, about 75% of my time is on my various businesses around the world. I'm still an entrepreneur in tech and otherwise, so lots in Canada and US, lots in Europe, and quite a bit of emerging stuff in the Middle East. So I'm mainly a businessman, but I do spend about a quarter of my time on public policy and philanthropy that really advances these kinds of issues with the Digital Governance Council, with the Council of Canadian Innovators, the Center for International Governance Innovation, the Center for Digital Rights, the Arctic Research Foundation. So I'm a big believer in Canada, its potential. I believe in institutional approaches. I believe in our capacities. But Most of my day job is business, but I'm happy to support these public policy.
I started this series asking the question, can Canada get its mojo back? What's your perception of where Canada is in the world today?
Well, there's been a substantial erosion in our prosperity and our security, and it's marked, and it's been going on for quite a while, but it's been accelerated under this current government, and it's a product of decades of elite policy failure in this country that has mismanaged how we look after a nation in a changing world. And it's like somebody's had really bad health habits and they go, I'm fine. And then at some point, at some age, 4 or 5 of them just pop at one time. But it's been a product of mismanagement for a long time. So I pin it on extraordinary elite policy failure in this country over the last 30 years.
So how do we get out of this? I think part of it is you need to know where you are. You need to do a brutal assessment of where you are.
Well, the old joke is change will happen one autopsy at a time. And the bottom line of it is we need the new voices. We need the updated thinking. There's a very good commentary by Rick Perkins in The Logic this morning, where Pierre Poilievre is saying we have to own our ideas, we have to grow our companies, we have to control our data. Where has that thinking been in 30 years? The world has changed in the last 30 years in a degree and rapidity that's unprecedented in mankind. All the rest of the successful innovation economies in the world changed their strategies, changed their institutions, changed their funding, changed their policies. And Canada's thinking and policies and infrastructure is rooted in the 1970s. And we've been living on borrowed time over 30 years. And I do a lot of policy and business around the world, Europe, and I'm certainly in Washington, lots in New York. And here, nobody does it like Canada in the policy. And we're last place in the OECD in 40 years. We're last place in growth in the 50 developing countries. So why? It's because our policies are counterproductive to prosperity and security. And surprise, surprise, it's almost like if you look at the advertisements in the 1930s, exercise your lungs today, smoke a cigarette. And if somebody has lung problems, well, they're just not smoking enough cigarettes. And in a sense, that's our prosperity and security strategy in this country. So it's entirely fixable. We have tremendous entrepreneurs. We have smart young minds. We have dedicated and proud Canadians, and we need to let them drive the country forward and move those who fail the country, just move them on.
One of the things, though, and I think we've talked about this, is we have great people and great ideas, but they tend to grow here and move out. And that's been a real problem for Canada, is holding on to talent, holding on to wealth generation capability.
Because we bully them out of the country. And when we give tens of billions of dollars to foreign battery companies and we invent the fundamental technology out of Dalhousie, taxpayer funded, and give it to Tesla, and then you bring these foreign companies here with tens of billions of subsidies, and then you say you give them tax holidays for 20 years, and none of the wealth effects are here, and none of the technology supply chain is here. And then they use that money to poach the best people from local companies. And then we raise the taxes on those people and say, well, you have to pay for your fair share for these foreign companies. And then you have the US with their Inflation Reduction Act and their Chips and Sciences Act saying, come here and we'll do business with you. Well, what do you think is going to happen? The good people are going to leave because you've driven them out of the country. It's like we coach the star athletes of the foreign Olympians and don't coach our own. And then what happens after a period of time, nobody does a press release say, I'm leaving the country, but they leave. And then eventually there's less good jobs, there's less prosperity, there's less GDP per capita, there's less tax revenue. And then you can't afford the things that we value in this country we love so much. And so it's all fixable, but these are all self-inflicted wounds. You can't pin any of this on Trump.
No, I think we tend to blame the outside instead of looking internally. I hear you on the investment piece of it. I did a piece this week. We're supposedly investing $2 billion in AI, which means we're going to buy a bunch of NVIDIA chips. We're going to pay a whole pile of this to external sources, and we're probably not going to develop any capability out of it. The UK yesterday had an incredible announcement. basically they're going to be leaders in AI. That doesn't seem to be something we're capable of stepping up to, at least at this point.
Well, we invented the fundamental AI after 30 years of taxpayer funded, and then University of Toronto with Jeffrey Hinton transferred that to Google, and that added many billions of dollars to their market cap, which they've said. We have this absurd promotion of a national AI strategy. The Canada's the first in the world. And I went to the ICID folks who are responsible for it, and the deputy minister. I said, can I see it? And they said, there's no document. There's no strategy. It's just more research funding. And then, of course, the recent announcements of money that just makes CoreWeave and NVIDIA and Blackstone richer, which is fine, but there's no sovereign prosperity. There's no sovereign control for Canada. So the way they've done policy for prosperity, it's kind of like a hospital where everybody's dying. And then they say, well, we need a PR campaign and a spin that says we're doing great and it's all going good. And I'm saying, I'm fine with communication strategy, but perhaps we should also focus on healing people and have better data and better performance so that people are actually healing, that then we can say this hospital's performing well. And that's kind of our economic strategy. It's not been substance, it's just been spin. But there comes a time where you just can't hide the reality that this is eroded and eroded. And so, yeah, I'm disappointed that the Minister of Industry has no ambition for Canada. He just wants Canada to really be an economic vassal state, and has focused on making foreign countries richer and stronger and Canada poorer and less sovereign. But that's not because we don't have smart Canadian policy people. That's not because we don't have great entrepreneurs. That's because we have a policy community and a government that is driving us to be a vassal state, mainly because they have a logic from the 1970s, where if you get a branch plant here, you get the production function here, and then you get lots of labor and tax benefit from moving material, manufacturing goods. But in the ideas economy of AI or even sophisticated batteries, you get a few manufacturing jobs now and then, but all the wealth effects and the tax base is off the country. So as an example, and this is public in a Globe story, Microsoft Canada's headquarters is in Ireland. So the tax effect and the wealth effect of them having coding here, it doesn't accrue here besides a few jobs subsidized by tax credits. So that's not enough to move the needle in an intangible economy. You have to be owning the companies. You have to be controlling the data. You have to have participation in the value add, not just be a labor input.
Yeah, and to coin an old cartoon, we've met the enemy and it is us.
Pogo.
Pogo.
You are exactly right.
Yeah.
We've met the enemy is us. That is 100% true. Yes.
So how do we get out of this, Jim? If you were laying out a strategy for what we should be doing, and I know that's presumptuous, but we have, you built companies. The impact of what you did in Waterloo is still there with the growth and how do we do that again?
Sure. Well, back then we had governments that wanted to work with our businesses, not poke them in the eye. And this has been a strange failure, because there was also in the previous government a pub crawl of 10 trade agreements, thinking that the facilitation of tangible goods was the road to prosperity. That's a 1970s, 80s playbook. What they're seeing now is that it's the owning the ideas and extracting a rent is in fact how you become prosperous and secure. And that's just not been in the playbook since the world, the knowledge, global knowledge-based economy birthed in 1994 with the WTO TRIPS, trade-related intellectual property system, I think it's TRIPS. And then the NAFTA had extensive IP provisions. That was really the birth of the global knowledge economy. And the rest of the world shifted to owning and capturing rents on that and building big companies around that. And we didn't participate in that. We just said we want a production function. We don't worry about owning. We don't worry about controlling. We don't worry about the value added rents. We don't worry about the taxes and the wealth effects that come with that. And then if you notice, there's been a systemic erosion of our productivity and prosperity since that time, because the world shifted and we didn't shift accordingly. So The bottom line is, and there's tremendous number of good people that have been advocating for these changed approaches for some time. We have very smart people in this country, but they're shunted aside in these economic decisions by the current incumbents. But in the words of Bob Dylan, the times they are changing. I've seen very encouraging things from people like Rick Perkins and Ryan Williams and Melissa Lantzman as an example, all saying we need to own our ideas. We need to have more sovereign approaches. We need to rethink this. And so I think it can be fixed. I know it can be fixed, but you have to aim at the right thing. And then you have to rally into it. And our policy apparatus is aimed at the wrong thing. It's been focused on making foreign companies rich. Whether it's giving tens of millions of dollars to MasterCard, over half the SIF money has gone to foreign firms. Very irresponsible money in the battery. It's a questionable architecture. None of the wealth effects properly accrue here. All the bets on one part of the table. Makes no sense. The way they've treated shreds, which Rick Perkins talks about in The Logic today, so it doesn't make sense. I think I was told in finance that 17 of the top 20 shred recipients are foreign companies. They'll have to confirm that, but that was told to me by the prior deputy minister.
Wow.
And so, yeah, we make the rest of the world rich, and then we wonder why we're not rich. And so let's start coaching our own teams. Let's start advocating ourselves. Nobody else in the world is going to do that. It's a very hard question to ask. Why did we squander 30 years? But the old adage, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is now.
Well, I started this out talking about Team Canada in 72, and we blew the first game and a couple of next ones, but we came back. It's never too late to come back if you've got a plan and you've got the ideas that can drive it forward. My perception, though, is that government doesn't take the people who are leaders in business seriously in this country. It's almost like they're suspicious of anyone who's interested in making a profit in Canada. Not if you're foreign, it's fine. Come on in, come on down. But I've always had that feeling that if you're a Canadian entrepreneur, you're somehow suspect. Even our procurement policies at government don't encourage procurement from companies that are developing things here. How do we change this?
Well, I think the cultural issue in terms of the people that do those kinds of things, and what is the psychological cultural profile behind people that would, it's almost like you refuse to feed and nourish your own children, but you'll happily do that for the neighbor's children around the corner. And that's fine to be kind to your neighbors, but as a parent, you have to start with your own children. And this alienation to your own economy, the people that pay for this place, that pay for their own salary, you're going to have to get a psychologist and a sociologist to come answer that question. I know it's a disease. I know it's wrong. I know it has to change. This current government will be historic by far as the worst government for economic mismanagement in the country. I don't think there's anyone that will rival them for that. It'll be a long drop towards second place. But yeah, I think there's something wrong in that. But I think that combined with not understanding how the world changed and used 1970s strategies, and even all the current leadership candidates for the Liberals and Perspectives, they're all using 1970s strategies. So none of the current contenders of the Liberals, except Frank Baylis, has a sense of, that I've heard, that they understand how productivity and prosperity is driven in the contemporary economy. We'll see who comes out and we'll see what they have to say. It's early, I know, but I watch these things carefully. And I've finally seen in the changing, I guess you'd call it a Polyev doctrine, that you want free markets and you want to secure Canada. But you also have to start by looking after Canada, and you have to look after Canada's own economy and own companies and own our ideas and control our data and be strong and independent. And you have to understand that was a playbook for Canada for 100 years. We built all kinds of sovereign institutions to enable, they did Austria in the 70s to unleash SAGD in Alberta. We built all kinds of institutions to finance farms and insure farms through the credit unions and the mutual companies. We had all kinds of sovereign communications and infrastructure to transport things. We know institutions, and we built them from an agrarian to a manufacturing economy. So we went through those stages. If you actually look at Canada in the early 1900s and in the mid 1900s, they actually built institutions for the nature of prosperity and the economy at the time. And it was beautiful. And that's what our forefathers and mothers left for us as a legacy. And the last 30 years, when it changed to a knowledge-based economy and a data economy, take for an example, there was a global scandal where 3 levels of government tried to privatize government in Toronto through the Sidewalk Labs project. And all of civil society and the best tech entrepreneurs had to fight the government from permanently eroding our prosperity in the biggest clean tech segment of smart cities. And the rest of the world, I assure you, I dealt with them. They thought our federal government had lost its marbles. It's almost students in a school learning in spite of the teacher, that you have to create your own little study groups and ignore the teacher and manage the subversion in the classroom. And that's been our policy. Imagine if instead of that, the government had gone to a dozen of the best smart city companies and say, how do we engage with you and grow you all into billion-dollar companies? One, that would have driven our prosperity. And two, that would have resolved the dichotomy between sustainability and the economy, because you have to choose between a hydrocarbon and food on the table. And of course, that's not a fair dichotomy to put people in. But if you'd grown these companies, the dichotomy would have started to resolve itself. And instead, they worsened it. And so that's what I mean by policy failure, not whether it's the mismanagement of the battery subsidies, whether it's mismanagement of the Google Smart City, whether it's mismanagement of giving away our best telecommunications research to Huawei. It's a disease, and it's inexplicable. I can assure you, nobody else in the world does it like Canada does. We're last place. Maybe those two things are linked. And how about we just do what the rest of those successful people in the world do? And as you say, why can't they work with our companies? And why do they consider the generator that pays for everything a bad thing? That's Pogo. I've seen the enemy, and the enemy is us.
Yeah. And I think we have to call it what it is. And I thank you for that, because I think people need to, I'm not worried about becoming the 51st state. I'm worried about becoming a colony. It's irrelevant if we don't get ourselves together on this, particularly with AI. And I think you probably understand this more than most people, is that this is a pivot point or an inflection point in economies. I think we'd say we barely coped with digital transformation as a country. And now we're facing one of the greatest changes in industry in our, probably in the past couple centuries. And that's something I don't see us prepared to do.
Well, I wrote a letter to the editor in 2019, 6 years ago, after they trumpeted the USMCA. And I said, we're on a path to become Puerto Rico without a passport, that the chronic instability and uncertainty they put in it was a feature, not a bug. And that we capitulated on all aspects of sovereign management and prosperity in this agreement. And we didn't negotiate anything. We conceded and capitulated to everything because we did not prepare. We built a house of sticks, not a house of bricks. We didn't understand it. And they told us that we're going to come back in 6 years and we're going to ask for rent increases. That's literally what Jared Kushner, and you'll see that in the letter I wrote in the Globe, to search Globe and Mail, Balsillie, Puerto Rico. That's hard. And so this was predictable. This was warned. And yet our policy community built a house of sticks, not of bricks. And now they're all scrambling and panicking. And so imagine people who were homesteading 150 years ago, not saving up food for the winter and preparing for the off season. And yet this is exactly, as an example, what this government has done in 6 years. They told us what they were doing. The Biden administration also said they're doing the same thing as Trump. Biden kept all of Trump's tariffs, added some more, canceled Keystone Pipeline, didn't help us on the Line 5 problem across Michigan. And so his economic treatment compared to Trump was actually harsher on Canada. And it's not because, obviously, Trump's words are unprofessional and unpresidential, and Biden is. But the institutional structural approaches to our prosperity and sovereignty are parallel because that's how the world operates. And we were hoping for a sentimental view, and there's no sentimentality in this. So it's a misapprehension of how the world is and how the world works. It's been a failure by policy for 30 years in Canada, but nobody's taken it this fast and this irresponsibly as this current government. And obviously, the extraordinary mismanagement of things like immigration and prosperity and research funding and subsidies and Canada and the global world. And you took a difficult situation and made it much worse. And so we're going to have to dig out of this. It's going to be a challenging time. We can do it, but we're going to have to buckle down and accept the fact that we're going to have to dig out of this and revisit approaches, be sovereign, bring in new voices, bring in updated thinking, and rally around it. And my interplay with Poilievre team and him personally is people will rally if they see that there's a changed approach and that we need to rebuild the country. And I do think we can do it. And I do think as a country, we're going to rally around to it, but we're going to have to see this as a national project. And what we're experiencing in the panic reactions by premiers and so on is everybody's freelancing, trying to react to the fact that, what do we do? What do we do? And the answer is, well, you should have built a house of bricks, not a house of sticks. And I go, I know. We're vulnerable. And we're going to have to navigate a very vulnerable era. And we have to make sure that we don't allow this to happen again and start building a house of bricks. But you can't build it overnight. And that's the situation. But in the types of engagement I do, my view, there is a tremendous number of good people, including yourself, who love this country. The moral code is you carry the load you think you can handle. These files and these articulations, I think I can handle, and I don't mind it in a sea of very good people that do it. And let's stop the stupid. Let's stop the subversion. Let's bring in the new voices. Let's bring in the proper orientation. And I think people are prepared to rally around and build the future. And I think we have to hand it to the younger people. That's their country that they're going to inherit. It's their future that they're building. And those that have put us in this hole, they have to move on.
I agree. And like I said, I'm not a partisan guy at all. I think the greatest times in this country we've put together have been when all of the parties have come together and recognized this. But some people got to go. It's time for them to move on. If you're not going to contribute to the solution, at least get out of the way.
Well, they put us in this hole. Not only they're not contributing to the solution, they put us in this hole. And I'm not naming names, but I could. And maybe there'll come a time I will. And I've named a couple, I guess, like Trudeau and Champagne, but there are many more. But they've really failed the country, this policy and the people behind the sidewalk labs. They've really failed the country. And you know, I feel very bad for intergenerationally for those involved. I think when I did a chart in the Year of Charts for the Globe and Mail last week, and the mismanagement of the economy when you're quote unquote doing this redistribution. In fact, if you don't understand the flow of how currency works and economic works, when you shrink it, the ones that hurt the most are the most vulnerable. So actually what's happened in the last 3 years is the lowest 20% of Canadian in income, they've had a plummeting of their purchasing power, and the inequality in Canada has hit a record rate. So you can purport to care about the most vulnerable, but you've hurt them the most. You can purport to care about the environment, but you've actually disabled it if you've disabled the prosperity of clean tech that go to resolving the dichotomy. So if you care about these things, you should behave differently. And whether it's a competence issue or just actually not caring, I don't know, but it's time. I just want good people in there who are conscientious, who have updated thinking, who can rally the country. And I know people like you and others, good people, will carry the load they can handle. And I'm happy to carry a load too, because I'm an electrician's son. I got everything because of this country. I wouldn't have gone to university without OSAP. So I'm a beneficiary of trees planted before me. And so I'm not going to pull up any ladder that I got to just climb up on. No way.
What's the final message you want to leave with everybody from the program?
Updated thinking, We have aimed at the wrong thing for 30 years. And I'm starting to see with people like Rick Perkins, Ryan Williams, Melissa Lantzman, Michelle Rempel, Adam Chambers, and certainly their leader, because he's given them the latitude, Pierre Poilievre, start aiming at the right thing. And that once you aim at the right thing, everything else clicks into gear. And if you listen to his messaging, he's actually talking about aiming at the right thing. I think that's excellent. Now, ensure you bring in updated new expert voices. I don't want to trade the current gang of amateur power trippers for a new gang of amateur power trippers, because all that's going to do is break people's heart and squander the goodwill and the commitment that people have with them. So you have to make sure that you aim at the right thing, which I'm confident that he's doing. Bring in all these young expert voices and thinkers, and build the policies and institutions that we need for a changed world. That's what's going to bring us forward. It's all there. I absolutely assure you the talent's there. Absolutely assure you the potential's there. Can be done. And I think if that happens, Poilievre will have 3 majorities and be the most consequential Canadian prime minister, certainly in 100 years, and one of the top 1 or 2 in the history of the country. So that's the opportunity for them to be historic, to put us on this path. And I'm just hoping and supporting that they make the most of it.
And what's the signs we watch for over the next weeks and months? What are the things that we should be keeping our eyes open for?
Well, for sure, how you support prosperity and growth in an era of intangibles. That's where the wealth and power is. And then, of course, how you marry that with our natural strengths of things like energy and agriculture and minerals, because those are critical elements. So how does this manifest into specific plans and specific approaches and specific institutions, specific policies? And what's happened in Canada is we've woken up to the fact that it's a rentier economy where there's landlords and tenants. It's not a Ricardian comparative advantage trading economy. In a comparative advantage trading economy, a rising tide raises all boats. In a rentier economy, it's absolute advantage where somebody can be the landlord 10 times out of 10, and you can be the tenant 10 times out of 10. So we have to start thinking about how we become a landlord, and with that, become more prosperous and secure. So you have to aim at that. You have to build the expertise and institutions and policies around it. I've been incredibly impressed by the leadership, and certainly people like Jamel Javani and also in that how they want more national approaches. This is a new generation. This is a new potential. But you look at everything that's happened here. It predates Trump. It has nothing to do with Trump. It's all on us for what we have to do. Nobody's going to look after Canada but Canada, but we've got it and we know how to do it. And I have belief in it. It's all doable. We just have to make sure that we this time really focus and execute on the task at hand. But sometimes if somebody's had bad health habits and then they get 4 or 5 things and you didn't listen to the doctor for 15 years and now you're a certain age and they say, I wish you listened to me 10 years ago. And then they say, oh, I know, but I promise I'm going to do it now. And if they actually take it to heart, you're going to heal and carry on and have a good rest of life, but you have to change approaches. So that's the stuff you have to listen very closely to what they're saying. Listen to what they're talking about. Today was the Logic article was an excellent indication. I'm encouraged. So, but I'm an entrepreneur. I have to be optimistic. But I don't think we can afford another hit.
Jim Balsillie, thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Pleasure, my friend.
See you soon.
Thank you.
And that has been episode 1 of Can Canada Get Its Mojo Back? An exploration of what it will take for us not to just survive, but to thrive in the new digital AI economy. And that was my interview with Jim Balsillie. Our show is usually not political, but even if I were to disagree with Jim politically, I've come to respect his opinion and knowledge. So if you support the people he's talking about, great. But even if you don't, I hope you listen to what he was talking about, because it's the most honest and perceptive analysis of what has happened to Canada that I've heard. And Balsillie is willing to put up not just his time, but his money. If you've read the announcements in the Post or seen the articles in the Globe and Mail, you'll see that there are people working actively to try and bring us back. We're all in this together. Thanks for listening. I'd love to hear your comments, questions, and suggestions for future interviews. You can reach me at editorial@technewsday.ca. I'm your host, Jim Love. Have a great weekend.